Hello all, I'm Art Hunter. Welcome to this week's presentation by the Canadian Club of Rome, called A Perfect Store, Canada's Future in Peril. Alan Jones is a geophysicist with 50 years of experience, and he's been quite world-class, spending much of his time traveling the world and in Africa, and it has been, in fact, received high honors from Africa, Canada, and throughout Europe. And he's going to be talking to us today about the importance of metals in keeping our economy going, and particularly in the conversion to a net zero world. And of course, we will have an opportunity to have a conversation with him at the conclusion of the formal presentation. A little bit about Alan, that he and I have been neighbors going back some time. I had first joined CACOR back in November '89, and I had convinced Alan to join CACOR back in mid-1990. And we both ended up going our separate ways. He went off to live in Ireland for some time later on in the '90s, and I was off doing something else as well. And we have both come back and rejoined CACOR. Alan has just been accepted by the membership committee earlier this week, so he is a CACOR member as soon as he antes up and pays his dues. In any event, I would like to turn the presentation now over to you, Alan, and we'll be talking with you later.
Well, thanks very much, Art, and I'd like to thank everybody for being prepared to listen to me. I think I might be telling you some things that might be a little uncomfortable, and that is the need to grow the mining sector in order to accomplish net zero. This talk really came about. I've been thinking about this for some time now, and then I passed by Art's house a few weeks ago, and I saw him on his deck, so I joined him for a beer, and I let him know my views, and he said, "Oh, you should give a CACOR talk." And I said, "Well, I'm not really ready." So he gave me a second beer. And then I said, yes. So here we are. For some reason, I expected to be giving this in July, but here we are in June. So I've captured all the material, and I'd like to, from the outset, give a huge thanks to Professor Simon Jowett of University of Nevada, Las Vegas. He gave a talk a week ago to an Australian audience containing a lot of some of the ideas that I'm about to present to you. And so he's made it possible to me to use some of his information. So very quickly, Art told you who I am. I a physics background and PhD. So because many of you don't know me, I thought I'd quickly introduce myself. First degree in physics, then moved into geophysics for master's, PhD, postdocs, Germany, Sweden, Canada, and then came to Ottawa, 20 years at the Geological Survey. And then I got offered a nice position over in Ireland and took early retirement because I wanted to come back to Canada. So I've had a career in government, industry, and academia. As Art said, I've had various recognitions from around the world. Member of CACOR, and I've rejoined as of this week, as Art says, as soon as I pay the $60. I think someone else has got the audio on. Art, have you got your audio on? I can hear some background noise. Yeah. There's some other background noise being picked up. Anyway, so the objectives of the presentation, I want to raise awareness amongst you of the increasing need for use of metals in our society, especially if we want to achieve net zero. And I want to make you aware just how hard this is going to be. It's much, much, much harder to find new deposits these days. I also want to raise the threat of global domination of mineral resources by China and what it poses. And that's apropos some discussions of this week by the G7, of course, in Cornwall. And I want to also make you aware of reducing enrolments in the earth sciences, especially geophysics at Western universities. And highlight the national programs that China and Australia are recognizing this need and have put national programs in place. And we don't have a holistic minerals plan for Canada at a national level. And all of these things together will mean that if we don't do something and do something very soon, we're going to become more and more reliant on mineral supplies from other countries. And I think if we can learn anything from the pandemic, that it is that we have to be self-reliant. So here's the dream, the aspirational dream, net zero by 2050. Here's today, 2021, and we're emitting 34 gigatons of CO2, and we want to get that to zero by 2050. And so we have this goal that we've signed up to, many countries have. We're not going to achieve that goal without mining. And a lot of people have been saying this, and here I've just captured something from last month from the BBC. But one thing that struck me just a couple of days ago is that the government has struck a net zero advisory board, and with 14 members on it, none of the 14 members has any mining experience. So just to make you aware that this is, unfortunately, I didn't find one for a Canadian baby, but a Canadian baby would probably use as much, if not more, given how much colder it is here than in America. How much resources an American baby will need. And you can see the resources are huge. Of course, most of it, or at least a third of it, is in buildings and roads, stone, sand, and gravel. But you can see all these metals that are going to be used, zinc and lead and coal. So let me just outline those for you. Look at your original cell phone, right? This is your first generation cell phone. And the elements that went into that cell phone are shown here in orange on the periodic table of elements. And as you can see, it's quite a lot already that went into that cell phone. Okay, have a look at a modern cell phone. We're using almost all the elements in the periodic table. The two elements that have dropped out are beryllium and lead, the two in there in red. But all the other elements, almost all the other elements are being used. And the problem is that a lot of these are not recyclable. And so here's a periodic table showing you what elements can be recycled and what are not recycled. They can't be easily recycled or not recycled. So particularly all those in red are not recycled, but all those in orange are barely recycled. So if you look at your cell phone, here's all the elements in the cell phone, and all those in red, every single cell phone has to get new stuff out the ground in order for that cell phone. And there's one over here, tantalum. We'll come back to tantalum, an interesting element. But you can see that every single cell phone, and there's about 1 billion a year produced, needs these metals, and they have to come out of the ground. They have to come from mining. So as the World Bank document shows that there has to be minerals and an increasing use of minerals for climate action. As we move to low carbon technologies, all of these low carbon technologies require large amounts of minerals to meet the needs. We've known this for 20 years. The United Nations 2002 World Summit on Sustainable Development told us in 2002, mining minerals and metals are important to the economic and social development of many countries. Minerals are essential for modern living. Take, for example, a wind farm, and here's a simple sketch of one. Look at the amount of rock that you need. You need 2 tons of rock to extract enough rare earth elements. You need 3 tons of rock to extract enough aluminium. You need almost 5 tons of rock to extract enough copper. And the World Bank estimates you need 250% increase in key minerals to keep to the 2-degree scenario level. So we don't want to go above 2-degree climate scenario goal. And most of these have got very limited recycling possibilities. If we look at the solar panels, the silver that's used in solar panels, so almost 7% of the global demand of silver. Where do we get our silver from? And this talk will touch on access to minerals as well as digging them out of the ground. Where do we go to dig them out of the ground? An important point here is that the biggest silver producers are Mexico and Peru, and have been traditionally, but China has come from relatively nowhere over the last 30 years to become a major player. Over a third of the production of the silver in the world is now coming from China. Lithium-ion batteries, absolutely essential for low carbon technologies, low carbon world. They need, of course, lithium, nickel, cobalt, plus a lot of other minerals. There is, of course, developments to lithium sulfur batteries, and this is wonderful. Much more energy density, higher energy density, factor of 2, maybe even 3 energy density, but they require even more lithium and also require sulfur. We're going through a change, a huge change, and a nice article here written just a few days ago in the BBC telling us why electric cars will take over sooner than you think. And just picking out this one sentence, we're in the middle of the biggest revolution of motoring since Henry Ford's first production line started back in 1913. It's likely to happen much more quickly than you imagine. And this is the global sale of electric cars up to 2021. And you can just see it's exponentially increasing. And what I find absolutely amusing is the Ford 150. I mean, the standard car or vehicle in North America that defines ruggedness and masculinity, if you like, they're bringing out an electric version of it. Ford sees the way, sees the future. If we look at global renewable energy capacity additions, those in solar and wind, the projected rise is not so great. It's a factor of about 2 to 2.5. Starting from 2020, we project an increase in the energy capacity additions. Those rises, though, are totally eclipsed by the energy capacity addition that will take place once we've started rolling out electric cars, right? How much copper do we need in a car? In a conventional combustion engine car, you need 9 kilograms of copper. In a hybrid car, you need 40 kilograms. In a battery electric vehicle, you need 83 kilograms, or almost 10 times as much copper in a battery electric vehicle as there is in an internal combustion engine. So let's do some very simple back of the envelope calculations, okay? There are on the roads today something like 1.4 billion vehicles globally. That's about 1 billion cars and 400 million trucks and buses. And let's assume they have a lifetime of 14 years to make the calculations easy. So that's 100 million new vehicles per year. That in itself is a little bit of an underestimate, because if you see this graph on the right, that's the amount of cars produced, cars alone. And we hit almost 100 million cars being produced in 2000, 2017, 2018, dropped off last year, of course, because of the pandemic. So we've got 100 million new vehicles, and just a car needs 83 kilograms. So let's increase that for trucks and buses. We need 15 billion kilograms, approximately 15 megatons of copper every year just to satisfy the electric vehicles. The recycling rate of copper is 55%, and that's about as good as it's going to get. Maybe 60, maybe 65. So we need 7 megatons of new copper each and every year. In addition, what about the copper needs of renewable energy sources? We know from these rises that are expected over the next 30 years to 2050, we're going to have to go from 0.6 megaton to 2 megaton to satisfy the copper needs for solar, Onshore wind is almost going to go up to a megaton, offshore wind almost half a megaton. So the total increase in copper for these is 3.2 megatons over 1.1 today. So we need an extra 2 megatons of copper. Again, if we assume about 55% recycling, we need an extra megaton. So that means altogether, taking cars and taking in these technologies, energy technologies, we need 8 megatons. How much are we producing right now? 16. And as you can see, copper production over the last years, since 1880, has been exponentially increasing. Most of our copper today comes from these giant deposits in Chile called copper porphyries. As you can see, Chile's gone from virtually nowhere to being a major copper producer. We need to increase from 16 to at least 24 because of electric vehicles and because of the solar panels, the windmills and offshore windmills and other technologies. So how are we going to do that? The bad news is we can't. This is a projection. You'll find a number of these on the web. I happen to take this one from this particular person. He shows our demand increasing, but the problem is our supply is decreasing. Why is our supply decreasing? And that's because we're losing major copper mines. By 2035, 200 of the world's largest major copper mines will have reached their end of life. And this means we're going to have a huge supply gap. This will seriously throttle our uptake of new technologies that we need to adopt for net zero, unless we can address this. And this particular analyst thinks we're going to move into a net deficit this year, 2021. Lithium is just as bleak. Current production of lithium is 82 megatons. Various predictions, and again, you can go on and look at all of these. I've chosen this particular one as it's quite recent. They show we're going into net deficit next year. We won't be able to produce enough lithium to meet our demands. This particular author looks at a number of recycling scenarios, including some that are pulled out of thin air, so to speak, future technologies, and shows that we're going to have a net deficit way up to 2050, up to net zero. We're not going to be able to meet these needs. And when we shift from lithium ion to lithium sulfur, that's going to cause these kicks here, because we're going to have far increased lithium requirements. Cobalt, another component of the batteries, of course, is even worse. We're going to go into net deficit this year. The world is not going to be able to produce enough cobalt to meet the needs. Where's it coming from? Well, 2/3 of the cobalt comes from the DRC. And the DRC is providing triple the amount of cobalt that it did 10 years ago, 140 megatons. And you might say, well, DRC, I'm worried about the DRC. Just a quick mention here that cobalt is not defined as a conflict mineral, but it is coming from the DRC. And it does have questionable human rights records. And there's a number of these essential metals that we need are coming from areas that are geographically restricted. So a quick mention on conflict minerals. These are minerals that are mined primarily in the eastern DRC that fund the conflicts that are going on there. One of the main ones is called coltan, and from coltan we get tantalum. And tantalum is what's in your cell phone. There's cassiterite, which we get tin from, used in tin cans and soda, and then wolframite, which is a source of tungsten used in metalworking tools, drill bits, mining, and so on. Looking at tantalum in particular, this shows where tantalum has come from since 1990. Up until mid-2000s, Australia was the largest supplier of tantalum. And then from about 2010 onwards, you'll see this rapid growth of this brown region here. And this brown region is around what's called the Great Lakes. And that's not the Canadian Great Lakes, that's the African Great Lakes, which is Eastern DRC, Burundi, Rwanda. And what's happened there is that all those warlords in Eastern DRC are mining this stuff, and we won't discuss how they're mining it. Horrible human rights records, slave labor, child labor, mining that stuff, and they were selling it cheaper than the Australians, and the world was buying it to put in cell phones. And there's a reasonable chance that the cell phone you have in your hand right now has got tantalum in that funded some of the conflict in the DRC. Sorry to say it, but it's the truth. As you can see, the world is doing something about this, though. Since January the 1st, 2021, the EU has issued a directive that requires supply chain diligence of tantalum so that none of this conflict tantalum will enter the EU. And we need to do the same in Canada. Niobium, we have a different issue. We have a supply risk. We need niobium in steels for all sorts of things, especially aerospace, medical imaging, fans, scanners, girders, oil rigs, all sorts of stuff. The problem with niobium is over 90% of it comes from one country, Brazil, which at the moment is sort of okay, but it might not be. It's always a bit of a worry when we have a supply risk, when we have an essential metal that's coming from one single source. Back to lithium-ion batteries. And this just shows you what we're going to need in order to meet the 2DS or 2-degree scenario and 4-degree scenario situation by 2050. And these are estimates from the World Bank. We're going to need 12 times as much aluminium, cobalt, iron, lead, lithium, manganese, and nickel in order to meet the 2-degree scenario according to the World Bank. If we only double our production, that means 100% increase in production, we'll be at the 4-degree scenario. So we need to be able to mine an awful lot more of these in order to put it into lithium batteries. Solar voltaics is the same story. We need to mine 3 times more than we are doing now in order to meet the 2-degree scenario. Or if we only mine 1.5 times more than we're doing now, we're at the 4-degree scenario situation. A quick mention on rare earth elements. And I take you back to your school chemistry, these are the lanthanides, sit in this place in the periodic table, and they usually include yttrium and scandium. The problem with rare earth elements are that the rare, the name kind of gives it away, but they're used in every device that you can think of. You're watching me on a device that has a lot of rare earths in it. Computer memory, DVD, rechargeable batteries, cell phones, catalytic converters, magnets, fluorescent lighting. Every electric vehicle, every hybrid electric vehicle has got several pounds of rare earths in it. Where do the rare earths come from? Well, up until 1985 or so, the largest producer was the USA. And then China became the largest producer. In about 2010, China produced almost 100% of the rare earths used worldwide. Since then, other countries have decided this isn't a viable situation, and both Australia and the USA have gone back into mining their rare earths because they see this as a critical metal that they want control over. China has known reserves of 44 billion ton, Vietnam 22 billion ton, Brazil 21 billion ton. The known reserves in Canada is less than 1 billion ton. Now you think, well, why is that? Canada and China are about the same size. And as a geophysicist, I can tell you they're about the same geology. They've got the same number of what's called Archean plates. They've had the same number of subduction zones and all that sort of stuff. there's no reason that China should have any more reserves of the rare earths than Canada. The reason that our reserves here are showing so low is that we don't know what we don't know. And that's because we just don't know enough about Canadian geology. Niobium that we need for global wind production is in dire straits. We're currently producing 7,000 tons. And if we want to meet the 2-degree scenario, which is this dark blue, we've got to multiply that by a factor of at least 15 times production of niobium to meet onshore wind, much more than that for offshore wind, going up to something like 50 times as much as we're, in order to meet the 2-degree scenario. Any less than that, we're at the 4-degree or even 6-degree scenario. Where do we get niobium from? Up until the 1980s, it mostly came from California. And then China started producing it and became the sole producer of niobium through 2010. And again, it's something that other countries are beginning to notice and starting to produce for themselves. The point about these rare earths that are coming from China, as it says here, and this I took this from the USGS, mining and processing rare earths has caused extensive environmental pollution in China. What is the point of moving to net zero if it means to do so, we are creating even more environmental pollution and human rights? And the way out of this conundrum is that Canada should be providing the world with clean rare earths and clean metals and minerals. This has been recognized already by the Biden administration. The Biden administration certainly wants to get into the game of producing metals and minerals that it needs for its future. And Biden has signed a $2 trillion infrastructure legislation, part of which is aimed at improving access to the rare earths, metals and minerals. One thing that many of you might not know is that you don't just go and mine for individual metals, that some of these metals that are very important to you come as byproducts from mining for something else. And I'm showing here in red, most of those in red on the periodic table are not mined for, they come as byproducts. And that means you're mining for something else. And these are small stuff that you pick up as you're mining for that something else. This is the wheel of companionality that kind of shows the main metals here: zinc, copper, nickel, and all the stuff you get. When you're mining for zinc, you're getting cadmium, indium, germanium, and so on, silver. When you're mining for gold, you get silver, copper, and so on. And the point here is that you need to mine for zinc in order to mine for indium, germanium, and cadmium, because they're byproducts of mining for zinc. And we need all of these in touchscreens, LEDs, fiber optic cables, semiconductors, cadmium, tellurium, solar panels, etc., etc., etc. And so look at this whole list of rare earths below and what you have to mine for above. Now, zinc, where do we get our zinc from? China's become one of the world's major suppliers of zinc. And the problem when you allow a player to become so dominant, that player begins to control the market and can turn the tap off at any time. Okay, so go and get some more out the damn ground. I can hear you all saying that. Just go mine for it. Just a very quick few slides on mining. It's very hard. It used to be easier than it is now. And we're not discovering deposits at the rate that we need to discover them to match this supply gap. These days, when people go out and they find what's called mineral showings, of every 3,000 mineral showings, only one makes it to a mine. And this schematic here shows you an idea that you might have a large area that shows mineralization, which is sub-economic. And then within that large area, there's only a tiny area where you've got economic ore that's worth mining. And so this issue is particularly discussed by Simon Jowett, who I just referred to earlier. One problem is it takes now over 20 years to take a mine from discovery to a mine. And the gradient is a lot slower than it was. These lines here show discovery periods in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and 2000. So of all the discoveries in the 50s, 68% of them have come to mine. Of all of those in the 60s, 56%, and so on. You think, well, that's not bad. But just look at the gradient here, how quickly they became mines. In the 1950s, 50% of the deposits became mines within 15 years. Here we are in the 2000s, and after 15 years, less than 10% of the deposits have become mines. The discovery rate of economic deposits is decreasing significantly. And these different colors refer to different metals. Most mining goes on for gold, but I'm not discussing gold in this presentation because I'm focusing on particularly net zero metals and minerals for net zero reasons. And you can see how we're not discovering things, base metals, we're not discovering them much at all as compared to what we're used to. And this is a very interesting diagram. It shows you two things. One is the time on the bottom and depth along the y-axis. So here, with increasing time, you can see how deep major deposits were found. The size of the bubble is the size of the deposit. And you can see early on, we found big deposits right at the surface. And this went right through to 2000. In fact, you can still find some close to the surface if you go to some difficult locations. But what's happening, mining has gone down and gone deeper. So as you can see, our deposits are getting deeper and they're getting smaller, which means they're getting harder to find. We know where to look in a general sense. And this cartoon tries to pull together our tectonic understanding which causes ore bodies. So here we have a subduction zone, like off the west coast of Canada, the Wandafooka Plate. And then you have the Cordillera, and you've got all sorts of metals and minerals in the Cordillera. And this is true in British Columbia. British Columbia and Chile have got a lot of the same type of geology. And so you get these copper porphyries, as we spoke about in British Columbia as well. But there's other sorts of tectonics. Besides plate tectonics, you have plume tectonics, and these lead to different deposits. I'll discuss the IOCG deposits. The interesting thing we've been finding is that all major world-class ore deposits, that's the big ones, the ones you really want to find, they lie above geochemical and geophysical anomalies in the deep crust and mantle. So here's a strategy then. Map the large-scale tectonics and then focusing on the local scale. The problem with this scenario is it doesn't really work in Earth's early time, what we call the Archean. That's more than half the Earth. The Earth is 4.6 billion years old, and for more than half of it, we had not plate tectonics running. So as a consequence of that, there's a project running right now, which is funded by the federal and provincial governments, called Metal Earth, and it's run out of Laurentian University, $104 million to try to understand the mineral endowment of what we call the Superior Craton. We're standing on the Superior Craton. We're right here. We're not actually, it's a bit below us. Oh, well, actually, Superior Craton's a bit to the north of us. This is one of the Archean cratons that makes up Canada. And the unusual thing is about the Superior Craton that the eastern part, which I show here in green, called the Abitibi subprovince, is mineral rich, whereas the western part, shown here in red, called the Wabigoon subprovince, that's got a very poor mineral endowment. And we don't understand why. These things are the same age, they've been through the same tectonic scenarios, but they've got very different mineral endowments. And so this particular project, Metal Earth, and you'll read more about that if you want, its fundamental objective is to transform our understanding of Earth's earlier evolution processes, to improve the targeting and finding of ore bodies. One spectacular example I like to show is this image from Olympic Dam. Olympic Dam is in South Australia, and it is the world's premier type example of what's called a giant IOCG, iron oxide copper gold deposit. Some mapping on the surface using geophysical methods came up with this electrical resistivity image. And I don't need to tell you anything about this. It's just like going in and having your brain scanned. Electromagnetic waves are sent down and recorded on the surface. And what came back is this image that shows a very deep electrically conducting zone in the deep crust. And this electrically conducting zone seems to have these fingers that come up to these three locations. A very strong finger that comes up to this place called OD, which is in fact the exact location of Olympic Dam. And then two other fingers coming up, one to this place called WW or Woodwell, and another one coming up to a VC or Vulcan. These are non-economic mineral deposits. Now you've got to remember that Australia's got 200 meters of sediment on top of its basement. You can't see the basement. So this is what Australia is using to try and find other Olympic dams. So what's the issue? The deposits are harder to find, they're deeper to find. So we need geoscientists with skills to look deep. We need geophysicists more than anything with strong geology backgrounds. So they've got to be master's level or PhD level. The attractive thing about getting into our game is the employment rate has been plummeting. The unemployment rate has been plummeting. Unemployment rate is less than 1% of geophysicists these days. Pay rate's pretty good. Or male, female is almost equal, over 100,000 US dollars. One problem is the age profile. And this is the age of members of the largest geophysics society in the world, the Society of Exploration Geophysicists. And this shows, if we start here at midday and go around, this is increasing age, or decreasing age, sorry. Increasing age. Here in the top sector, this dark blue are the youngest people. 17 to 24-year-olds is only 7% of those. 25 to 34-year-olds is 11% of those. 34 to 44-year-olds, 15%. Most of the members of the SCG, fully 2/3 of the members of the SCG are greater than 45, with a lot in 55 and a lot over 65. So we're an aging science. Whoops. We're not attracting students into our programs. Concerns have been expressed by many Western countries, and this shows one from the US, some concern about reducing enrollments in earth sciences. Mining, of course, is associated with low technology and dirty technology. But the reality is that modern mineral exploration methods are just as advanced as those used in space exploration and medical sciences. We desperately need young people to move into this game. And this shows, again, for the US, the talent gap. We're going to be 130,000 people short within 8 years, just in the US alone. And so we're not finding enough ore, and we're not getting enough people in geosciences in order to find more ore. People who are in the geosciences these days are mostly in oil. And here's this circle on the right shows the size of the oil industry, a $1.7 billion industry. And within that big circle are these smaller circles showing the sizes of the various industries associated with the separate metals. Gold, of course, is the largest, but we're not interested in gold for this talk. But you can see the silver industry, the titanium industry. They're all fairly small. Taken together, they're about a third of the size of the oil industry. There's other industries, of course, that are important to us, like geothermal, $4.6 billion industry. They're small, but they're growing fast. The point is, half the geophysicists on the planet are in oil and gas, and they have a particular type of skill set, and a skill set that's not that useful for mineral exploration. So we need to retrain these people. We need to significantly enhance this 10% into a much higher number. The estimates are that we're going to see, we have a current market in geophysics of around 14 billion, and that we'll have a market within 7 years on from that of 20 billion. So we're going to have to see a 50% growth in the industry just to keep our heads above water. And most of that growth, according to this particular report, will occur in the Americas. I would say we need at least a 200% growth if we're going to meet the demands of net zero. Because as I've shown you, I hope you'll agree, the metals need to meet net zero by 2050 is absolutely huge. What are other countries doing? Well, China has recognized this for some time now. And China has a program called Sinoprobe. Sinoprobe started some years ago with a test phase that was $500 million, Canadian dollars. It was very successful. And the head of Sinoprobe, Professor Dong Shuwen, he was asked to put in a proposal for phase 2. So he put in a proposal for 40 billion yuan, or renminbi. And that's 7.6 billion Canadian dollars. And he put that in to the Academy of Sciences, and he was told that proposal was too small. So he put in a proposal for 65 billion yuan, 12.5 billion Canadian dollars, and he was funded. That works out to 9 Canadian dollars per Chinese person, given that the population is 1.4 billion. What's happened in China is that they've elevated the earth sciences to have the same national importance as the space sciences and the health sciences. What's China doing externally? I've spent some time in Africa, and I can tell you, China is making sure it has a future. They've got a long-term vision, a 100-year vision, and they're beginning to dominate supply of many essential metals and minerals. In 2005, China controlled 7 mines outside its borders. In 2018, it controlled 60 mines outside its borders. And that's from this particular paper there. And that number is increasing all the time. Here again, just to emphasize that point, China's dominance in steel production, from nothing to the biggest producer by far these days. By 2017, it produced more than half the world's steel. Australia recognizes this problem, and Australia has a program called Uncover. This is a government, all levels of government, that's federal and provincial, or state as they say, sorry, industry research collaborative effort. And the purpose of Uncover is to focus Australia's geoscience effort on providing the knowledge base and the technology to increase success rate for mineral exploration. As I said, most of Australia is covered in sediment, so they don't actually see the rocks. They don't know what's down there. And so they're going to geophysics, and there's a number of efforts. There's a regional electromagnetic effort, and I'm showing you here the locations of the sites in this regional effort. They're doing a regional airborne electromagnetic effort. They're going to cover the whole country with electromagnetics, and they're doing a seismic effort. What are we doing in Canada? Well, we're doing a lot of talking, not a lot of action. We have exactly the same geology that other countries are exploiting, particularly China and Australia. The Northern Miner recently had an article about Canada having the right ingredients to be a leader in EV batteries. As Cecilia Jamassi wrote just a month ago, Canada has a once-in-a-generation opportunity to establish itself as a major player in the global battery sector, but it needs to act fast to seize the opportunity. This is a list of all the main mining companies in the world by size. The problem in Canada is that our mining is fractured, and our companies have been bought out. Two major companies, Falconbridge, have been bought out first by Xstrata, now Glencore, which is the third largest in the world. And Inco, another Canadian mining company, was bought out by Vale, which is the fourth largest. So when you look down this list of mining companies, you have to go down to 14 and look and find a potash company. And then 15, you find a gold company. And they're the only two Canadian companies on this list of top 25 mining companies in the world. This is a list of a lot of the metals that we need and the leading producer and the second leading producer. We've got a huge potential. We have the same geology as China, Australia, South Africa. We're nowhere on this league table except we're second for niobium. If we don't do something and do something soon, we're going to have to import metals from other countries, and then we'll be at their mercy for both access and for pricing. Here's a map I just got off USGS yesterday showing medium and large size mineral deposits. And I just want to emphasize how empty Canada is in terms of known mineral deposits. And that's because it's not because there's nothing there, it's because we don't know what's there. Just a few days ago, there was this announcement from the Tesla chair, Robin Denholm, announcing that Tesla is investing $1 billion in Australia's mining supply to meet the growing electric vehicle demand. And her statement is, Australia is the only country in the world with resources in all three of the critical battery metals. That's nonsense, absolute nonsense. As I just showed you from that article, Canada has the right ingredients. Canada's rich in lithium, graphite, nickel, cobalt, aluminium, manganese, all key ingredients to advanced battery technology. So why has she gone to Australia? I mean, we're not that far from Austin, Texas, which is now the headquarters of Tesla. They've gone to Australia because the geology is better known and the country is mining friendly. So what do we need? What do we have to do? We need a national coordinated strategy to map the whole of Canada at regional scale using deep crust and mantle imaging methods. We need to emulate Sinuprobe and Uncover. There's little sense sending out small geological mapping groups. We need to know the whole of Canada first. We need a national strategy for training modern holistic geoscientists who are comfortable with geology, physics, and chemistry. Universities are where geoscientists are trained, but earth scientists are under threat everywhere due to their low enrollments. Look what just happened at Laurentian. Of all things, they cut the environmental sciences program. Environmental sciences, the thing we need to go forward, was cut at Laurentian because of low enrollments. And the problem is that at universities, each is an island unto itself. And so there isn't any national program. We don't need a lot of geoscientists. It's not like engineers or doctors. We don't need a lot, but we need enough. And we're not going to get enough for the future because we've seen huge reductions in the number of professors who are training people in mineral geophysics, mineral scale geophysics. We also need coordination at the national level of a number of the geoscience, especially geophysics societies. And I'll just list a whole bunch of them here to show you that there are that many. I find it a bit ridiculous that when we don't have a single voice to speak to government, to speak to any of the players. So the conclusions are that there's no path to net zero without a lot more mining. Certainly Canada's Net Zero Advisory Board should appoint a mining specialist to its numbers. A huge number of new economic deposits have to be found, and very quickly, if we are to achieve net zero and to continue technological advances without a severe throttling of progress and a severe delay in net zero. I quite frankly think we haven't a hope of reaching net zero by 2050. All the easy to find deposits have been found and are being exploited. Deposits must now be found in hard places, hard because of geography or politics, and or because of depth. The drive to net zero, though, cannot come at the cost of environmental degradation or human rights abuses. And that's where Canada can step in. Canada can contribute significantly through clean mining. We have the environmental laws. We have the right will to do this properly. But we know far too little about Canada's mineral wealth, and it should be a national strategy. And I've always liked these words from Benjamin Franklin. By failing to prepare, you're preparing to fail. So I'd just like to finish by acknowledging, first and foremost, my PhD supervisor from way back, Rosemary Hutton, in the 70s. I've had a huge amount of colleagues in Canada and worldwide who've been on my journey, my 50-year journey in the earth sciences. I'd like to particularly thank Simon Jowett for providing his presentation of last week, and I recommend you all go and watch that. He's more eloquent than I am. And I'd like to thank Art for the 2 beers and the invitation to present my thoughts. Thank you, Art. Thank you, everybody.
Well, thank you. That was very good. There's been a number of questions, of course, but I'm going to get the first one in, and Anitra is next. In the world of chemistry, I read a lot about substitutions, and clearly there's a bunch of chemists and that are busy trying to do exactly this. Is this significant at all in terms of addressing the rare earth depletion issue?
Wow, that's a tough one, Art. I mean, like I say, I can't answer that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I can't answer that. I don't know whether you can easily substitute one rare earth for another rare earth.
Well, perhaps that's not really the question, but it is the whole world of chemistry is looking at matters in total and saying, is there other ways to get the job done? Yeah. Not necessarily a direct rare earth with one rare earth for another. And I guess it's not your field, and I just figured
I would say the field of chemistry is what took us from the old first generation cell phone to the new cell phone, where instead of using a quarter of the periodic table, we're now using 3/4 of the periodic table. So what you're proposing is in fact a step backwards, and use less of the periodic table. I'm sure that's possible. We will end up with cell phones that are back to that size, though. I mean, the reason that tantalum was taken because the tantalum capacitors are tiny.
All right. And Anitra, do you want to go ahead? And next, we got David Doherty.
Alan, I want to thank you for a most illuminating and well put together and very shocking talk.
Yeah, sorry.
Shocking, because I think the futurists who have all these scenarios and models, and many of whom have done great predictions about climate change and keeping things to the 1.5 or 2 degrees, have not entered into this, what seems to me a straightforward calculation of the components, which they should have done at the very beginning before leading the world down the rosy path of all these technologies, which are so metal dependent and elemental dependent. And it seems to me that the global climate change proponents have done the world a great deal of disservice if we're simply going to pursue non-viable, because of the limitations of the metals involved in them, like windmills and, as you say, electric batteries and so forth, solutions, when perhaps we should have been looking at geothermal and ocean current and tidal and all kinds of other things that might take a lot less. And I understand that this isn't a question that you yourself have done a lot of delving in, but it seems to me one of the basic questions that appears bubbles up from your findings, which are to me completely amazing. And I do have a PhD in ocean sciences and ocean chemistry, so I understand exactly where you're coming from. Maybe you'd like to reply to that.
Yeah, well, I would say, I mean, one of the last large projects I was involved in Ireland was looking at low enthalpy geothermal resource for Ireland. And it really doesn't matter whether you, what energy source you think of. I mean, one of my colleagues was looking at waves or tidal energy. All of these are going to need technologies that will require a lot of these elements. And you're absolutely correct. And in fact, it's only when I started looking at this in detail myself a few months ago, I realized that there's a mismatch between those who aspire to net zero and those who appreciate what that means in terms of the minerals that we'll need to extract from the ground to do it.
And the second part of the question being that Greenland has had a lot of glacial melt, and the Chinese are already in there taking stock of what is now uncovered from being under a mile of ice, and are trying to dominate Greenland, which hardly has any people at all, but has a great deal of metals. And I'm wondering if Canada doesn't also benefit from glacial melts, and perhaps things on the Shield or other places in Canada and the high Rockies and so forth get exposed that perhaps weren't when the original geo maps were made because of the warming itself.
Yeah. Well, it's true that as glaciers retreat, then more rock will be exposed. And one particular area that some of you may have heard of is the so-called Golden Triangle. This is an area in northwest British Columbia. And it's an area that's under very active exploration right now, particularly for the same type of deposits we see in Chile for these copper porphyries. A third of that is glaciated. And so if the glaciers start to retreat from there over the next 50 years, then access will become easier.
Thank you for an excellent presentation.
Thank you for your words, your kind words.
Okay, David, you want to go ahead, and John Mayer, you're next.
Okay. Thank you, Alan, for a great talk. Very interesting information. I'm sure I'm going to be going back to review it at a later date. Many different questions came to mind, and I have a second one that'll come later. I wanted to start with this one. Is the increasing depth and decreasing size of mineral deposits indicating various mineral limits to growth?
Well, it's the way that the fluids come to surface means that you get almost like a carrot shape, if you like. And you'll find some minerals in some places and you won't find them in other places, because in some places there hasn't been erosion off the top. So they've got more of the carrot, so to speak. Whereas other places, they've got less of the carrot. So you see different types of minerals more closer to the base of it. And so, yes, there is a limit to how deep down you can go and find these concentrations. I doubt we're ever going to be going down deep into the, 10 kilometers. I mean, well, they are down that deep in South Africa, of course. But I doubt we'll be going that deep on a routine basis. We do find routinely, when we look at our electromagnetic imaging data, we do find huge, like I showed you, that big red blob under Olympic Dam. We do find those sort of things all over Canada, down at 15 kilometers. So, maybe in 200 years, we'll be mining down at 15 kilometers.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and John Meyer, do you want to go ahead? And next is Peter Bolkowski.
Yeah, Alan, I just wanted to say how extremely useful this is for the work I'm doing now. So thank you. I wanted to just point out to people that Chris Clugston has written a book called Blip, which deals with the scarcity of metals, minerals. And are you familiar with that?
No, I'm not. No, I'm not.
Okay, all right, I'll just throw that out there. So it's Chris Clugston and Blip, if anyone wants to read more on this, which hopefully Alan would agree with, but maybe he doesn't. Anyway, it's coverage. The question I have is that going forward, we'll be going to an increasingly electrified energy system. And I wonder if you see any impact of that as we move off fossil fuels from our fossil fuel base of infrastructure. Do you see any difficulty in accessing minerals using electrical energy versus our current fossil fuel? Do you see any difficulties with that?
Sorry, not quite sure what you mean by accessing them. Do you mean extracting them? Or?
Yeah, everything now has to work. I mean, I was in a mine for a summer, Elliott Lake hard rock uranium, and everything was diesel.
Right, right. Yeah.
I don't think there's a difficulty going from electrical to or diesel fossil fuel to electrical anywhere except flying. But I just wonder if you see that there's some difficulty going to some process of accessing the minerals, mining, using 100% electricity as opposed to the fossil fuels we use now.
Yeah, I'm not a mining engineer, but I don't see why there should be an issue.
Okay.
I think generally you talked about, mining electricity distribution, and I think generally we should all basically emulate art, and we should all be self-producing in our own homes. I don't know. This idea of having a centralized energy production facility sending electricity all over the place. Yes, you need that for heavy industry, but most of us can survive with generating our own.
Well, I think Art and myself would give you 2 thumbs up for that statement. So that's great.
I've had solar panels on my roof for 10 years now.
Okay, fabulous. Okay, thanks very much.
Yeah.
Okay, and Peter Bolkowski and Bill Pugsley, you're next after.
Hi, Alan. Peter Bolkowski. I'm an oil and gas chemist.
Oh, great.
Okay. We've seen over the 40 some odd years that I've been in the industry, the ups and downs in enrollments in geology and geophysics here in Alberta.
Yeah.
But the environmental movement has demonized resource extraction. That includes both mining and oil and gas.
Yes.
When I talk to young people, they have no desire to go into
Right.
any of that
Right.
because they're going to be ostracized by the rest of their friends.
Right.
They, at this point in time, see relatively few jobs, and they see ups and downs in both mining and oil and gas. So they can expect to be laid off and shuffled around the country a number of times through their lives. It's not an attractive thing for them to get into. For companies, the long development times, the approval times, the multiple recycles limit what they're willing now to spend either on exploration or on development. How do we resolve those? Those are fundamental issues that are imposed by our society and by the governments.
Well, that's entirely right. Absolutely entirely right. We have a perception problem. And if we don't crack this, if we don't somehow sell mining as something that is essential to us, that we need to do, and that it's attractive intellectually. I mean, I've been doing this 50 years and I'd like to think that it's intellectually challenging. I certainly find it intellectually challenging. If we don't sell this, what we're basically going to do is give over our supply to other countries. I was until very recently a specially appointed professor at the China University Geosciences, Beijing, and I used to go there every year to give lectures to staff and students, and I was actually paid. They paid me in as much rice as I could eat. Of course, that's ended over the last year and a half since the political issues, and I said, well, I'm not coming to China until the two Michaels are released, you know. And so, unfortunately, I no longer have that position. But you go to the China University of Geosciences, Beijing, and that's one of two universities in China. There's a China University of Geosciences, Beijing, China University of Geosciences, Wuhan, that are solely focused on educating geoscientists. And there's thousands of students being educated, thousands of them. And so if we don't train Canadians, all those positions, those needs I've just outlined for you, what we need to do, all those needs will be filled by people from other countries. And so I think you're right. You're entirely right of the bust and boom cycle. And you might not like to hear this, but you know, oil and gas is a sunsetting industry. So I wouldn't recommend to a young person of age 20 to think about getting into oil and gas these days, because it's probably got a 30-year lifetime, and they might want a 40-year career. But the mining industry, it's got to grow. It has to grow if we want to have a net zero society.
Thank you.
Okay, the next one is Bill Pugsley. Bill, you want to go ahead, and Ted Manning, you're next.
Okay, thank you, Art, and thank you, Alan, for a very good, well-organized and presented talk. My question's driven by 60 years ago, I had to make a choice between geophysics and atmospheric physics. And having spent two summers working with the gravity division, which was then under the Department of Mines and Technical Surveys.
Oh, really?
A title that maybe should come back given the thrust of your talk. But the gravity surveys I was involved with was helicopter surveys of gravity in northern Saskatchewan and around Yellowknife on the one summer, and the other summer in Baffin Island. And gravity measurements taken on a grid, an 8-kilometer grid, can of course tell you subsurface mineral or geophysical properties. And so I'm wondering, given that Canada probably could use more sources of minerals, what is the potential for that, either in the land portion of the Northwest Territories or under the ocean, given our claims to the continental shelf? And as a sub question, how much potential generally worldwide is there to look for minerals at the bottom of oceans?
Yeah, true. And certainly, the idea of doing what you did, well, we have satellites for those now. And satellite from gravity, or gravity from satellite rather, is nowhere near as accurate as on land, but it does pinpoint areas to go in on land and do land-based measurements. And so we're very fortunate. And in fact, now they're developing airborne gravity meters that are very accurate. And so we can access a lot of information like that very quickly and reasonably affordably. What still has to be done on land, though, is if you want to look deep down, and we're looking here 500 meters to 1 kilometer, you have to go and put an instrument on the ground and let it measure, be it a seismometer or electromagnetic device like I use. And so that's the approaches that the Chinese have taken and the approaches that the Australians have taken.
And the underwater, I mean, is there much potential for minerals
There certainly
under
is. Yeah.
deep water? Yeah.
Oh yeah, no, that's huge. I mean, that's a whole nother talk about these black smokers and things like that. The sulfides underwater. No, that's absolutely huge.
Okay, thank you.
And huge potential. Yeah.
Okay, Ted, you're up, and Jeff Passmore, you're next.
It's too bad Anitra left, because she would have answered that last one for you. She's doing an awful lot of underwater surveying for a variety of bottom things, mainly associated with the plant growth and so on, and also mapping and things like that. But yeah, there are very strong emerging technologies now that will make it easier. I want to change directions almost completely and say that this really is the essence of limits to growth, where we are discovering that certain substances are really going to be the principal barriers to almost anything we will try to do. And this probably isn't the only sector that people would try and make that same kind of presentation. There are probably other ones that we don't know about. But when I was with government for a long time, we always were worried about why they never would consider the idea of strategic planning. And strategic planning by barriers, by sectors, by determining what might be the most critical to them trying to achieve any of their plans. And I'm not going to ask you to talk about Canada, but I'm asking everyone, do you know of anybody, any governments who are doing this effectively to try and target strategic resources and to try and really match consumption possibilities to production possibilities?
Well, with regard to your limits to growth, I think the only response I could make is that if we don't do anything, if we don't adopt these technologies, the world is in serious trouble. Mm-hmm. We're gonna have a huge increase in, we'll be at least a 6-degree scenario or higher. Mm-hmm. So we either don't do anything and we're in trouble, or we try to do something, and I've laid out what trying to do something means in terms of what we have to do, in how much we have to dig out the ground in order to do something. So, yeah, you're right. You're right. There's basically too many of us in the world. It's too late. China's now going to allow up to 3 kids.
Well, it may be self-regulating, whether we like it or not, and many people may be the victim. Thank you very much, Alan.
Yeah,
I know it's a tough question to throw at you, but a very interesting area presentation.
Okay, Jeff, you're next, and Gabriella, you're on deck.
Thanks, Art, and thank you, Alan, for. I am not I'm a public affairs professional, but I've spent my career working with engineers and chemists, and it seems to me you have a major public affairs challenge. And in listening to your presentation, I couldn't help but think Well, actually, the first comment when I saw your 10 times as much copper needed in an EV as in an internal combustion engine, should I feel less guilty about driving an ICE car? So that you can answer it in a second. But my main point is that in listening to you talk, you could substitute any number of sectors, especially in Canada, where we do not have a national strategy. We don't have an industrial strategy in Canada. This government is, very famous for talking and no action, as you pointed out. It reminds me of the Grand Old Duke of York. I don't know if you know that little limerick.
Yeah.
Yes. So Trudeau is definitely the Grand Old Duke of York incarnate in Canada. Indeed, in terms of the employment side, so I work in the industrial bioeconomy. We don't have there's 60 countries in the world who have national bioeconomy strategies, and Canada is not one of them. Costa Rica has one, for goodness sakes. We should be embarrassed. But we have the same issue with respect to employment that you talked about in mining, and that Pugsley spoke about in forestry. No young people want to work in forestry either, for a whole host of reasons, one of which is, well, they want to be constantly connected. So they don't want to go into some camp for 2 weeks at a time where they can't talk to their friends. So this issue repeats itself over and over again. And these are more comments than questions, other than my earlier one about should I feel a little less guilty about driving an ICE engine?
Well, you're right, Jeff. There is a sense that one gets when one buys an electric vehicle or puts solar panels on one's roof that of moral superiority, and it's totally unfounded, because the environmental cost and the potential human rights issues associated with the metals and minerals that go into your electric car, your solar panels, are huge, right? And so we do have to look at the whole picture, the holistic picture, and possibly, if you've got a very efficient internal combustion engine, you may be a small car, you may be right, actually, on a total weight of evidence, you may be right.
It's a small one, yes.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. Gabriella, and we've got Rob Hoffman next.
Yeah, hi, Alan. Fascinating presentation. I have to say I have one daughter, the youngest one, who studied earth sciences here in Canada.
Oh, great.
And then she went to Brazil and she completed some of her studies.
Okay.
But then she was swept in the environmental wave. So she hasn't completed, she's not working in that field, unfortunately, although she loves it. So I don't know what I can do to try to convince her to go back. But anyway, my comment that I started was, I think that we're caught in a big competition in advancing technologies at very high speed, probably for profit or other. And there is a lot of obsolescence built in many of these products. Like we built a lot of companies build a lot of cellular phones or computers, etc. So there is a lot of obsolescence built in it.
Right.
So maybe we do need the variety of rare minerals, but do we need the quantity?
Right. Yeah, I mean, I was astounded when I read a few days ago the number of cell phones. I think it was 1 billion a year that are produced. I mean, it's pretty ridiculous. And the pressure on the young kids today to have the very latest cell phone. I think as I showed, each cell phone, there's a whole bunch of metals and elements that cannot be recycled. So every single cell phone means that much more digging that stuff out the ground that may not be necessary. And I don't know how you address this, but you're exactly right about the quality of things that are manufactured these days. I mean, a few years ago, I had to buy a new toaster. We'd had one for 25 years. I bought a new toaster. And I must say, I tried, I'm from England, my wife's from Germany. We tried very hard in Canada to buy a European toaster. We couldn't. We bought one from China a few years ago. We bought another one last year.
There you go.
Yeah.
So it's not really the quantity. It's not really the quality of the type of rare minerals that we need, is the quantity. And what is driving this? But it's not only profit, is who is going to be ahead. It could be a geopolitical as well as a consumerism and values.
I mean, the numbers I gave about the need of the lithium and cobalt, that was based on a requirement for 100 million new vehicles a year.
Right.
Each vehicle having on average a 14-year lifespan. If we could increase the average lifespan to 20 years, then our needs go down to 68 million vehicles from 100 million. And that already reduces our needs for extraction of lithium, cobalt, nickel, and all the stuff we need to make a vehicle. So if we can build for longevity, that would really help. Yeah.
That's it. Yes, that's it. We have to try to work on that. Okay, well, thanks very much, Alan.
Okay, and of course, with this, Alan, when you come to vehicles, there is also interest in self-driving vehicles, which means you really don't have to own a vehicle that sits around 90% of the time doing nothing. Exactly. And so maybe the number of vehicles is overestimated.
Right.
Rob Hoffman, you're up.
Okay, thanks, Art. And thanks very much, Alan, for a most informative presentation.
Thank you, Rob.
It seems to me the elephant in the room is China. We seem to be intent on following we seem to be intent on following the lead of the Americans in antagonizing China. And the Americans, of course, influenced or dominated by the multinational corporations. It seems to me that perhaps a collaborative effort to build on China's strengths might well be in order. We seem to be relying on private capital raised by large corporations to invest in what's needed to solve what is fundamentally a social good problem, namely the climate change problem. Strikes me that China has long since learned that most of that investment is not going to come from corporate pockets or private interests. It's going to come from government sources. And maybe we should learn that lesson as well. A comment, please.
I think the one issue that the main issue here is that China is one honking big, huge country of 1.4 billion people. India's about the same size, but India's not really a big player. All the rest of us, we're tiny in comparison, and we don't act and work with one voice. Now, I've done a lot of work in sub-Saharan Africa, part of my projects. And if you drive around Zambia, you will see a lot of camps where Chinese workers sleep in, and they then provide the labor for construction projects. And what the Chinese government's doing, I mean, what Western governments have done in Africa has given money to Africans. And that money has not been well spent. And you talk to a lot of Africans in Zambia, Zimbabwe and such, and they say, yeah, you Westerners, you give us money and it ends up in the back pockets of rich people and we see no benefit. What the Chinese do, they come in and say, okay, we're going to build you an infrastructure and you will pay us in mineral rights. And so they come in and they build bridges and roads and whatever, and they build them with their own labor. Some of that labor are Chinese prisoners who get reductions in sentences by offering to work overseas, to work off their time. And so the local countries, they don't get any employment from this. They end up with a bridge or a road, but they've given away mineral rights. And I don't know if you've ever been to the Maldives, but they've linked the two main islands in the Maldives, and that bridge was built by China. And now the Maldivians are having to give the Chinese some of their islands to pay for that. And so this is a model that's different from the Western model. The Western model of charity is give them money and let them sort themselves out, whereas the Chinese model is we'll go in there, we'll build your infrastructure, and you will pay us in mineral rights. And this is giving the Chinese a secured access to minerals for hundreds of years. And that's something that the West is not doing, because our time scale, the political time scale is the next election. Whereas in China, the political time scale is tens of years.
Thanks. I guess, well, I'm not suggesting that we emulate the Chinese model entirely, and particularly it's human rights records.
True.
But it does seem to me that some collaborative efforts, because they have in their own way resolved much more difficult problems than we have. We might open our minds a little bit. It strikes me that our service to the multinational corporations and the billionaires that abound is no way to resolve essentially problems of the public good.
Exactly right. Yeah.
I had thought that maybe this would be our last question, but I'd like to get Dennis Woods to step in, because he has a very interesting question to ask. We'll just drag this out a little bit longer. Dennis, go ahead. Unmute yourself. There we go.
It was just a comment to somebody else's point. I wrote, as someone who operates a geophysical contracting company where young employees are billed at remote camps in northern Canada, trust me, they are in contact with their friends down south on a regular basis. And it almost seems like all the time, via excellent satellite communication.
Yeah.
So this remoteness excuse for not getting into geoscience is clearly a thing of the past.
Well, totally true, Dennis, particularly with Elon Musk's Starlink system. You're going to be able to get 80 megabits per second download and upload anywhere in the world.
Okay. Ted, do you want to thank Alan?
I certainly will. I think you wanted me to share this on my screen at the same time.
Yes.
Okay, let's see if it'll do it. Oh, good.
Full screen?
Yeah, there we go. I'll make it larger. You can see it. Yeah, it says I'm screen sharing. I have no idea why I have a strange green one on my. Let's try again. See if it will actually share properly. If not, there we go. It's still there. But Alan, that was a wonderful presentation. I'm standing in for Jean Doherty, and really she should have been here because she is a geologist and is probably would have understood a great deal more of what you said than all the rest of us. And I particularly liked the note on, I've worked in both the Maldives and in China with strategic planning at the central governments in both. And we must talk one day, because what you said is very good from both things. I could enlarge that. But that said, I'd like to thank you very much for doing something that fits perfectly with the notion of trying to understand the limits to growth, trying to figure out how they actually are likely to affect us, and to anticipate and prevent changes we do not want. And that really helps build on the ones we've been having lately from a number of people, everyone from Bill Reese to through, talking about, yes, we really have problems, and let's make sure that we identify them properly and start working on them. So much appreciate what you've offered us.
Yeah, thank you.
We have now developed a thing at the end to put at the end of each one, essentially saying that anyone who doesn't see the website reasonably, it's right on here, thecanadiancore.com. Everybody's presentation will in fact be on there within a few days. There's only one exception. And they will be available as YouTube videos, and we would encourage you to share them with everyone. And we'd also like you to hit subscribe, because apparently it will get us publicity to get our presentations more widely shared. And Art has noted that we've got over 1,000 views of the one from Bill Reese the other day. That's the one that's gone biggest. And we're going to be monitoring the other ones. We'd also make sure to ask that any of you who are not yet members, please consider being a member, because that pays to put these things in front of you, and make sure that we do have the website and the graphics and that sort of stuff. And again, if you just hit canadiancore.com, we have the website regularly updates all the time, tells you what's on next week. And increasingly, we're making links to other parts of the Club of Rome, getting members in from the US tour and from Europe, where we are exchanging information on the stuff that we hope you will all find important. So once again, thank you very much. We're just testing this last page to make sure it's there for everybody. And when we do put the video out from Alan, this should be the last slide in it, and hopefully it won't have a green line across it. So thank you all very much for coming, and thank you again, Alan. And I think that's the end of our taping.